did. We're going to call to order the Siloam Springs Board of Directors Joint Workshop with the Siloam Board of Directors and the Planning and Zoning Commission. This will be to cover the Unified Development Code and Act 595. So can we have a roll call, please?
T. Williams.
Here. Here.
Thank you. Sally.
Here.
McKinney.
Here.
Thomas.
Here.
Sutton.
Here.
Renard.
Here.
Kevin Williams.
Here.
Blair.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Wiles.
Here.
Hunt. Ristler. Allen. Carroll.
Here.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to ask that you all please stand with me as Director Carroll leads us in a word of prayer. Remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's pray. Father, we give thanks for this evening, opportunity to come do work of the city. We can do it in your name and your presence. Thank you for the food that was provided earlier for us, for the blessing that rests upon it, the nourishment it provides for our bodies. Thank you for the presentation that will be given this evening that we may be able to read and see and understand and be in unity as we see this accomplished. We give these things in thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. So at this time, we will move right into our agenda, which is the presentation of the UDC Overview. Ben, is that going to be you?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It will be both me and Megan Thomas. So both of us will be presenting. So one moment when we get that pulled up here. There we go. Thank you. So we're here this evening for several matters, but one that's right before us is the Unified Development Code. And thank you also having the honor to be able to present both bodies. I'm used to presenting the Planning Commission and to the board, so this is great to be able to do this to both of you at the same time. For those of you that are not familiar yet, we're going to do a little quick overview of just what the Unified Development Code is, and then kind of get into more of the meat of the code itself. So Unified Development Code is essentially a collection of different chapters within the code book that are being consolidated together into one chapter, which would be the new chapter 35. And this is being done for several reasons. First off, to consolidate things in terms of ease of use. So individuals that are needing to find different items in our code book aren't having to flip through different chapters. They have everything in one place. But in addition to that, we are hoping to modernize these codes and correct some longstanding issues that we've identified from over the years. The 2040 Comprehensive Plan is a very important key to that. The idea behind the Unified Development Code generally came out of the Comprehensive Plan as it was adopted in 2022, which is the city's long-range master plan that goes out to the year 2040. Upon review of the plan, we identified 15 different goals that were met within the 0 to 5 years range that would be unilaterally approved or met, if you will, by adoption of the Unified Development Code. So we would be getting 15 different goals accomplished from the comp plan. Passage of the UDC will work to meet these goals in one document. And so moving on, Megan.
Thank you. Megan Thomas, current planner. So this slide provides an overview of the UDC approval process with our current position indicated by the blue arrow next to July 29th. That's today. We've received numerous comments, all of which have been thoroughly reviewed and considered. These comments have played a key role in shaping updates across the various versions of the code. Version 3.2 of the UDC and a guide to the changes are now available online on our website. Following the February meeting, we sent out a questionnaire to local builders and developers to gather their feedback and concerns. We did receive 13 responses on that questionnaire. On March 14th, we paused work on the UDC pending final approval of state legislation. Work did resume on the UDC in April following that legislative session. We hosted a stakeholder roundtable on June 9th, followed by a series of one-on-one meetings with stakeholders throughout June and July. On June 24th, we held a town hall meeting, which allowed the public the opportunity to review the UDC and track where we are in the approval process. Today's meeting is meant to provide an update to both the Planning Commission and the Board of Directors on where we're at in that process and highlight some of the changes that have been made in response to those stakeholder comments. Our goal is to present the final UDC to the Planning Commission for review at the September 9th meeting, and that will be followed by Board of Directors review in November. Ben?
So here you see the code structure explaining the purpose of adding the titles to the code, and you can see those listed on the left-hand side. And this is a unique organization to our code, and the reason for this is we are proposing to add these into the code as a better sort of subdivider within the chapter, because we're putting so much into one particular chapter of the code book. It's important to kind of organize that better. So we have the 9 titles, which roughly correspond to former chapters of the code book. As you can see the Title 2 used to be Chapter 78, for instance, and Title 4 used to be Chapter 53, and so on and so forth. So you can see on the right-hand side the redaction, which shows that those chapters, those former chapters, will be entirely repealed and then replaced with the new code. And moving on to this slide here. So this is fastly coming to you, both bodies, for approval. And so I wanted to make sure you are aware of what you're going to be receiving. It will be a very large document because it will have the ordinance, which is the left side, which is what we call the clean copy. It's what the code will look like when complete. Then we want to have the redaction in there, and that's very helpful because it shows what used to be and what is proposed. And we have actually color-coded that so you can see changes as they evolved over time. So not everything is the same color as redacted out. So the most recent 3.3 will be like a dark green that you'll see in the code when that's made available. And then on the right side, you see the explanation guide. This essentially is like the memoranda that would go with the ordinance, but it is step-by-step organized by every code change. So if you wanted to zero in on one particular area, you can get an explanation on it rather than going through just pages and pages and pages of a document. This is all organized by the citations in the actual code. Megan?
Just kind of leapfrogging over here. So this slide shows the different versions of the document. Version 1.0 was the initial draft that consolidated the code into a single document, including the previous sign code revisions. Version 2.0 underwent an in-depth staff review with weekly meetings dedicated to examining each section of the code. Version 3.0 was presented to the public, and following initial feedback, updates were incorporated and released as version 3.1. Version 3.2 incorporates mandatory legislative updates from Little Rock. And we are currently in the process of working on version 3.3 to include the latest stakeholder feedback from those one-on-one meetings that we had. After incorporating stakeholder feedback, staff will publish version 3.3 online. The public comment period for this version is expected to close on August 15th, so that's about a month from now. Version 4.0, the final version, is expected to be presented to the Planning Commission on September 9th, as previously mentioned. If the Planning Commission recommends additional changes at that meeting, they will be incorporated into version 5.0, which will serve as the final ordinance that will be presented to the Board of Directors. Ben?
So that's all the background of the mechanics, if you will, of the code of where we are. But as far as what is being proposed, those of you that have seen earlier presentations like town halls and such, this is not, from this point forward, it's not going to be a repeat of that. What that we're looking here is specifically updates that are recent that we are looking at with version 3.2 to 3.3. So this is all the kind of the new stuff, if you will, that we've heard you, and we want to repeat back, kind of parrot back to you, the board and the Planning Commission, what we're proposing. So through the bullets here, we're changing the title to Development Signs and Zoning based off of a comment that we wanted to be more inclusive, to have signs in the actual title, so it was clear that the sign code was embedded in the actual UDC. We've made several grammatical and stylistic changes and such based off of comments we received, and we're still working through many of those right now. We are added a separate fees section at the end of the first title that will summarize all the fees throughout the document and have it in one location so that it's easy to find for people if they want to just look at what all the fees are. We've addressed the role of the city administrator. That, as you can imagine, the term administrator, city administrator, is peppered throughout the code because we're a city administrator form of government, so everything goes through the city administrator. So we have addressed that better by fine-tuning the definition of who that is so that when the code refers back to it, you know who you're talking about. We also addressed pronoun usage. That was a comment we received at being more less gender specific and just being more neutral in whom we're referring to when we say city administrator, not a he or a she, but just the city administrator, whoever is in that role. We updated referrals to state and federal statutes, and what that means is the citations. We had a comment that we wanted to know where in the state code it says to do this or the federal code says to do that. So we are actually adding those citations in the actual document. And then getting into Title I, that's generally for all the titles. And then for Title I, we added a definition on code reference for cluster housing. That's heavily described in the comprehensive plan, but we don't really talk about it in our code. So we are addressing that. And we also are addressing the definition of a child care home. And moving on to next slide here. So this is continuing on with Title I. We added a definition for the master street plan. Curiously, we don't actually have it defined anywhere in the code, so we actually added a definition for that. Level of service, that's a section that's in the street design standards. It was formerly in the master street plan, but we made it references to where that comes from. I think there was some confusion, like, well, who came up with this level of service A through F? So we've referencing that to AASHTO, the American Association for State Highway and Transportation Officials. And then a section regarding conflicting code references. Anytime you have lots of code out there, you're bound to have two that conflict with each other in some way. And so what we are stating is that rather than saying the most restrictive, we're going to say the most recently approved, because that would represent more the current thinking of the city to go off of the most current code rather than just whatever one happened to be more restrictive. And then with Title II, we did not make any changes with Title II for this cycle for 3.3 and 3.2, 3.3. Again.
Okay, so Title III primarily covers administrative procedures related to permits. Since the previous versions, we have revised the neighborhood meeting requirement, initially proposing a broader application. It now only applies to future plan developments within the UPD zone. These neighborhood meetings are also now proposed to be hosted by the city as part of the pre-application conference. This change responds to stakeholder feedback and addresses security concerns related to those meetings. We also removed the requirement that plats must be filed within 60 days of approval, as enforcement of that timeline was found to fall outside of the city's jurisdiction. We've eliminated the term sound planning from the code, along with any references to it, as definitions such as neighborhood context and character already address this concept adequately. Lastly, in response to developer input, the time extension for expired projects has been increased from 6-month extensions to 1-year extensions. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris and our attorney, Heather Owens, who have some additional points to provide on this slide. Chris?
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Chris.
I'm Chris Paxton. I'm the Director of Administrative Services, and I just wanted to briefly address a concern that our city attorney's office had regarding the approval of preliminary plats and site development plans, which are large-scale type developments. Typical procedures for most municipalities in Arkansas have those approved at a planning commission level. We have brought this forward to the board before for consideration. However, the city attorney wanted to bring that up during the UDC for an additional conversation due to some concerns based off of some case law and different applications. Typically what happens for most jurisdictions is that a preliminary plat, that's a new subdivision, or a large-scale development, we call those site development plans. Whenever those go through the planning commission, that gives you an approval level at that level. The reason why is because there's a case law, which is Richardson v. City of Planning Commission from 1988, which states that when a plan of this type comes through, then it has to be, the planning commission is obligated to make an approval if it meets the requirements of the city's code. So over the last year, I have heard from several of the board members also that tend to ask the question, if we're required to approve this, then why does it have to come to us? And the answer to that has been that it is part of our code, that it does have to go from the planning commission to the board. However, the board can make the determination to reverse course on that and allow it to be approved at a planning commission level with different things that they can set in place as safeguards, for example, an appeals route. That would be more typical, is to have an appeal process. One of the major issues that the city attorney's office, and I will let Heather speak on that in just a moment. One of the major issues is that whenever you approve at a planning commission level, it allows for that opportunity for something to be appealed to the board. If something is forwarded to the board and then gets approved or denied at that level, the next route forward is the court. So I will, on that note, that is outside of my professional scope, so I will hand that over to the city attorney's office, Heather Owens.
I mean, that's something you guys can do. That's your prerogative. You're the board. You can determine how these things work and how they flow through your system. An issue came up recently with a preliminary plat that was approved, and there's actually an error in the plat. A former employee missed a code regulation. A plat was approved with an error. Generally, if a city employee makes an error like that, the city is not held to that employee's decision because the employee doesn't have the authority to speak on behalf of the city. When the plat is approved by the board of directors, that creates a unique problem.
If you'll speak into the mic.
Sorry,
Thank you,
I
Heather.
thought I'm trying to.
Yeah, thank
that
you.
creates a unique problem because as the board of directors, you are authorized to speak on behalf of the city. And when there is an error, that creates a problem that we may not be able to require the applicant to fix the error. And when in other circumstances, we would be able to do that. So that's just something to keep in mind, along with the length of the process. So, you know, if things are approved at a commission level preliminarily, that never comes to you guys. It will make your meeting shorter. I don't know how you feel about that. a preliminary plat is not approval of a final plat, again, you can require revisions, that kind of thing still. And if you're hiring good people, I think in your planning department, those are things that could be taken care of at an administrative level as opposed to with the board. But my concern primarily is with the ratification of an error of an employee. If it's just an employee who doesn't have the authority to act on behalf of the city, we have more recourse than when the preliminary plat plan is approved by the board, because you are authorized to speak on behalf of the city, and you are essentially saying, we're going to allow this to go forward with the error. Okay, that's just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. Megan?
Madam Mayor, may I
Yes,
ask a
Betsy.
question real quick? So, Heather, if the planning and zoning, if they approve it, the error can still be made to fix the error. It's just if it comes before the board of directors.
And this specific case, these facts I've not found a case in my research directly on point. However, the case law does indicate that if someone with authority to act on behalf of the municipality approves the error, then the city is going to be bound by that error. It's not to say we couldn't try, in that case, but I think the road is a lot harder than if the approval comes from employees rather than the board.
But the planning commission would be considered the city, representing the city,
Well,
correct?
but they don't have the authority to bind the city.
Oh, okay.
You do,
Okay.
as the board.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Chris?
sorry. Just on that note, this is more of a discussion topic that can be discussed at this, and staff is just looking for recommendations. If you wanted to make recommendations, then during the discussion period, we can discuss that and add anything that the board would like to add at that time.
Thank you, sir. Megan?
Well, in your current planning process does allow, the preliminary plat is not, approval of that plat does not constitute approval of the final plat. And your procedures now say that a final plat goes through the same process as the preliminary plat, which means technical review by the planning commission with a recommendation to, approve or deny, then that comes back to you for approval of the final plat. You always have the option to deny approval of that final plat, I think, but it may create some legal jeopardy since it was already approved by you with the first time. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, the route to not approve the final plat is still there. However, I think it may potentially create a problem in the future. It could lead to a problem.
Megan? Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with the presentation of the UDC. We're on Title IV. Title IV outlines the city's landscaping standards. While there have been no significant changes to the landscaping code, let me switch over to that one. While there have been no significant changes to the landscaping code since version 3.2, there have been a few updates. We've added regulations related to the diameter at breast height to guide the preservation and replacement of significant trees on properties. A new requirement has also been introduced for street trees within subdivisions, but there have been no other significant changes made since those previous versions. That's all I have for y'all on landscaping. So I'll move on. Title V addresses the sign code, which has undergone a comprehensive overhaul over the past several years. In response to stakeholder feedback, we've added new regulations for wind-assisted signs, allowing them within the city under specific conditions. These conditions include setback requirements from streets, minimum spacing between signs, and limiting their uses to within the C zoning districts, that's commercial zoning districts. We're also currently evaluating the legal considerations around regulating sign walkers. Those are individuals who hold or wear signs, and you can see that in the image on the screen. These are becoming increasingly more common, and so we are looking into the law on those. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Ben again. Just a quick update on the last point that Megan stated. We actually are taking sign walkers completely out of the code, out of advice from meeting with the police chief and the city attorney, because there is enough laws out there regarding public safety and pedestrian safety that they can address those with the existing laws without creating additional regulations on people holding a sign. So that's just a little bit of an update there. But moving on to next slide here, we're going to the subdivision of land. As you might recall, we did the sidewalk ordinance about 3 or 4 months ago. That full ordinance is being incorporated into the code. I believe we had a earlier version and 3.1. Now that's been corrected to show the correct amended version of that ordinance. There was a request that we look at park areas. As you might recall, we are requesting that parks be dedicated as part of a new subdivision as based off of how many lots are being included. And we have put a limit that no more than 15% of a detention area could be counted as part of the park requirement. After meeting with the development community, we have brought that up to 50%, citing several examples where soccer pitches and things like that are actually used in detention basins and when programmed and safe to do so. So that was specifically out of their request to up that percentage. We updated so the developer can, if they wanted to, offer the parkland to the city as accepted by the city board with final plat to be in addition to, or if they did not want to have them privately maintained. So there's that option. Doesn't mean the city is by any way, shape, or form obligated to take the parkland, but it is an option rather than automatically always saying that they can only be privately maintained. We looked at the block width and shortened that to 250 based off of, again, more what industry standards are doing. 250 feet is still about, I think, 4 lots together before you get a next street, so it should be okay to do that. We provided additional caveats on circumstances of when wider easements can be requested. This was a heavy topic of discussion at the stakeholder roundtable as well as with individual meetings. So we kind of locked that down a little bit so that there has to be some extenuating circumstances as to why you would need a wider easement. And those easements really need to be proportionate to the value of that development. It can't be what's called a takings, where you would bring in more of a land, the landowner would be paying more into a public service compared to maybe their neighbor. So it would be trying to keep it all fair with being consistent in that way. We added an exemption for pre-application meetings for preliminary plats if the local engineer is based in Siloam Springs. Again, that was another stakeholder comment. And that's just because if they're familiar enough with our process, they don't need to go to the an orientation meeting every time when they know what a lot of the steps are and whatnot. And they clarified some of the submittal requirements for plats themselves. Moving into street design standards, we addressed a 20-foot wide width for the alleyway. This has been identified as potentially too wide, and that's for the right-of-way of the alleyway, because alleyways tend to be much more narrow than that, and it would be prohibitive for closer development to the rear setback if you had the right-of-way that wide. So we are looking at that. Redoing some of the figures within the table 16, which is some of the specific street design specifications, adding requirements for street trees and their appropriate sizes for each street classification, with guidelines of spacings between the trees and street lighting. And this is significant so that, you know, you have a local street, or what we're calling now a neighborhood street, and a preliminary plat. That will be required to have the avenue street trees that you would see. So that would be a really nice addition, I think, with kind of like what you see on the right there in the image. We're redoing our cross sections. There were several comments from you that the cross sections were really hard to read. They're really small on the page. I believe it was one page that had everything on there. Now they're doing individual pages for each street cross section. And it's a really interesting view. It's kind of a plan view where you see the street, and it's once we publish it, I think everyone will be really pleased with that. So our acting engineer right now is working on that. Additional typical street requirements, not standard, to allow for greater flexibility on some of the site conditions. That's definitely needed as things come out with the development of these projects. Right-of-way dedications have been updated, only include the value of the land requested that is proportional to the cost of the development. That was what I was referring back earlier about takings laws. There's actually several federal case laws where you just can't tell somebody to dedicate too much of what they're, when it's not proportionate to the development they're proposing. And then finally, we are looking in the fortifying the site distance triangle regulations include speed limits, and also what looking at street trees and such, like how close they can be to a street corner. And then moving into the final title here, well, not the final title, but the title that has probably the most updates as they go. We are looking at the zoning regulations. So we added a new section to address structural lighting standards. That had come up where if there are two parking lots and the parking lot next to a new proposed business is already lit and has all the lighting they can need, it wouldn't make sense to then try to restrict the lighting from a new parking lot when it's going onto a lot already lit. So we're talking about maybe creating exceptions for that in those type of situations. We had a sunset clause October 1st, and many parts of the code, as you read through it, that has been pushed back to January 1 due to just how long this process has been taking, and we just need a little extra time to have that go in effect. The R5 zone, we had a good catch from one of the reviewers that we were allowing multifamily by right in the townhome zones, and that wouldn't have made sense if it was specifically just for townhomes. Why would you also allow multifamily in there? And so we put that in as a special use rather than allowed by right within townhomes. We added notation under setbacks in the R3 and R4 to make sure everyone is aware that there is a 0 lot line option in those zones. If you meet certain conditions, you don't have to meet the setback. You don't even need to get a variance. You just have to meet certain conditions. And that's been kind of buried in the code way back, and a lot of people looking at it aren't aware of that. So we're adding a little kind of breadcrumbs so people are knowing that you have that option. We added a waiver option for some of the development requirements in the UPD, again, to allow for more flexibility on if they can make a case that a waiver is warranted, not have to go through a whole variance process. You can do that. And then updated parts of the fence code to provide better clarity on fences constructed over easements, particularly drainage easements. Continuing on with the fences, added those requirements within the R5, PDL, and UPD zones. Those were previously not included. We added an exception for fences to allow up to a 12-foot tall fence when the adjacent land use is significantly different, as approved by the administrator. So if there are two development projects and one's of a higher elevation than another one, putting up a 12-foot fence to help block the view. We added a section on the parking lots that if they face, and we see a picture of that on the right here, if the parking lot is facing residential and they have headlights that shine into neighboring homes, which can happen, we're requiring some type of evergreen shrubbery there to prevent that from happening. We relaxed some of the driveway standards for triplex and quadplexes that have come up several times. Have been administration of the zoning code, and in fact, that had triggered multiple variances last year. So we're looking at why we can maybe make that work flow a little bit better. Reviewing dumpster dimension standards based off of a stakeholder request. No proposed changes were made to the 3 series and Title IX for penalties. And with that, we are open up for any of your questions. Thank you.
Chris, at this point in time, are you all ready for the public input before we move into the discussion with the two boards, or?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. So then I will ask if there is anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment or have questions. Public input will be restricted to the 3-minute time limit, just like we always do in all meetings. So I will open the floor if there is anyone that'd like to come forward. And there is not. So with that, we will move to our boards for discussion, questions, comments that you have for staff. Is there anyone that would like to start with that?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Brad.
I'm curious what the planning board feels about the having authorization with the preliminary plats, specifically Kevin. Anybody on the board? I mean,
I'm just an individual, I'm not the board.
anybody over there that, I mean, you guys feel comfortable with that?
I have no problem answering that. I believe, personally, I feel comfortable with it. Again, it's preliminary plat, it's not the final plat. With the reviewing and everything we do, we get everything like you guys do early, so we're able to go through and read and question, and when we have questions at the meeting, we bring them up, and when we do recommend now for something for approval, we feel pretty confident in it, so I wouldn't have any problem with it.
Madam Mayor, related to that, I thought there was a time when you all were the final say on the preliminary. Am I remembering that wrong? Did we not change that in the last few years? The
Your
board.
planning commission has no decision-making authority. Zero.
I just thought at one time since my time on the board that you all were the ones that sent the, no? Okay.
Okay.
I just
Chris,
remember
you're
that wrong.
saying,
Yes, Madam Mayor, the senior planner has been here for 20 years, and it has not been in
okay.
place
Yeah.
since he's been
Okay,
here.
well, I thought we had made a change with that at one point. Maybe we had just talked about it at one point.
was
That
a
is correct.
discussion.
We have talked
Okay.
about
there
that.
has been
Okay.
more than one discussion about that, so.
Madam Mayor, having said that, I'm just encouraging us to go further than talking about it for consideration on our level.
I would agree with that.
So Christina, I think that you are hearing that the Board of Directors would like for you to look into that and to perhaps bring something forward to them for that change to be made?
That could probably, if that change is made, it could probably be included in this UDC revision, I would assume. It would just expand your planning commission is included in the UDC, and if you choose to expand their power with respect to the preliminary plat, that could be included in this adoption of this new ordinance.
So we're all clear that we do want to do something. Y'all will decide what that something needs to be and bring it to us.
Madam Mayor, I can work
Yes.
with the city attorney's office and with the city administrator and draft some language that would allow that to move forward in some fashion.
Perfect. All right.
Hi,
Yes. Wayne?
So we are, from what we're hearing from the staff, you guys are proposing that too? Is that correct?
It's not currently in the UDC proposal. We would still have to draft some language and add that to the UDC proposal. And once it gets added into the UDC, it would come in as in version 4.0 that would make it to the Planning Commission. If you wanted to remove it, it would have to either be removed at that point. Once it hands over to the Planning Commission, they hear it for the first time. Anything that's heard by the Planning Commission for the first time can only be removed or added by the planning commission. At that point, staff's hands off.
I think maybe though, they're saying, do you support that they are making that final decision now and it doesn't have to move forward to the board? And I think he's just asking if staff
That's
feels
the
like.
main question.
I will yield to the decision of the board of directors.
Well, you have no recommendation one way or the other is what you're telling us.
Recommendation one way or the other. Okay.
Mayor,
Yes, Brad.
that's too good of an answer from an employee. We wanted some meat there. That's how you stay
I
employed.
saw some nodding heads over there, so.
I had one more total different topic, Title VI subdivision of land. And I'm, you know, I've stated clearly, I'm a big fan of detention basins and using them for a purpose. A concern I would have when we go to 50% and the city takes on the maintenance of that, and I think of the property we already own, you know, that's going to be a, I'm not going to say significant burden, but without a POA or HOA, it could become, you know, a tasking for staff. Because like right now with the heat and all that, just trying to keep up with that to make it right for the intent of this purpose, which is recreational in nature, could be a issue.
Madam Mayor?
Betsy.
That was one of my concerns. When I saw that, who decides, it said the city had the option, or they could give it to the city. But the city doesn't have to take it. Who decides if the city takes the land to upkeep?
I believe that is, when they make a recommendation to hand that over, the way that it's drafted is that it would come forward as a resolution to the board. So it would be up to the board whether or not to accept that resolution. If they accept the resolution and it gets handed over to the city, then that would be a decision of the board.
Well, and if there isn't a POA or HOA or whatever, then nobody's left to take care of it. The idea of more parks is wonderful. I love parks, I love green space, but the potential for our staff to have to take care of, that's an awful lot.
Yes, that's the nature of this type of an ordinance. It's a common issue in other cities too. So, you know, one of the enforcement strategies has been if you are in a POA that the POA goes defunct and you have common space, then the city can actually do abatements or do some sort of an action to rectify any issue with that. And other cities have gone as far as they will do the abatement and they will invoice it to each of the subdivision property owners that were associated with the original filed homeowners association. The legalities of that, I would have to deflect to the city attorney's office, and it would probably require some review. That is definitely a real world issue. Whenever you have homeowners associations, the average life is between 25 and 50 years, and a common space that is associated with homeowners association is permanent potentially. The other side of the coin, though, is that activated spaces, whenever you have a homeowners association with parkland that's been improved or a detention pond that has an activated space, whether it's walking trails, benches, or other components, it becomes an asset to the community. And when a community has, a homeowners association has assets, they're more likely to survive. They have a reason to exist rather than just billing everyone $125 every month or whatever your POA fees are. That reason is to take care of and maintain this space that you can use as a community. So when you have a detention pond that's activated, it even serves an additional function. A detention pond that's been activated for example, if it has a basketball court or some sort of a solid surface in the center of it, it's more likely to be maintained on a regular basis instead of the thing that's in the backyard that's fenced around and grows up, and then we have an issue of who's supposed to mow that. When we have those activated spaces, they're more likely to be maintained and more likely to remain as a part of that community and be a taken care of asset instead of a liability.
Thank you. I had a question going back to the preliminary plat, et cetera. If it doesn't come before the board and the planning commission can approve it, how much time does that save developers typically?
It could potentially take about a month off of the development review process. Typically about 3 to 4 weeks.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Kevin.
back to the detention basins. Do we currently not have requirements that those are fenced? How would that fall into this situation where they'd be used with dual purpose?
I'm not sure if all of our detention, so the answer to your question is to talk really briefly about the difference between detention and retention. Detention detains water, but it releases that water and it has a dry bottom. So detention, D, dry. Retention retains, it's wet. So a retention pond retains that water. You have a pond there that stays wet all the time. So typically, and I wish we had our city engineer here, but typically speaking, a retention pond has a fence around it. I do not know if our detention ponds require a fence. I don't think that they do. Typically speaking, though, retention ponds have fences, which are the wet ponds, because there's a safety issue involved. It'll either have a fence or some sort of a safety bench, which allows people that fall into it to be able to get out safely. Detention ponds, though, those dewater, they release all of the water that's been detained within 48 to 72 hours, depending on the size of it. So there may be a slight safety risk during a storm or immediately following, but there's not a continual risk associated with that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, there's a pond back behind, it's on Holly there, right by Walmart back there. That's in that neighborhood, and they don't have a fence around it. Is there a reason why that's different?
So if any pond that was, so there's two things to consider. Not all ponds that are in neighborhoods are improved. They may have been an agricultural pond that had some detention qualities, that had some detention capabilities that were associated with that. So it may have had a little bit of capacity to take on some additional water for the surrounding development. Those were existing. They may not have been required to have the fencing. Some of those predate the requirement. So if you have a retention or a detention pond that predates a requirement, it's just like anything else. We consider that a legal non-conforming status. So if you have a pond that, if it was built today, would have had a requirement that yesterday it didn't have, then it falls into that legal non-conforming status, and in a future upgrade at that site that would require some sort of a permit that would trigger that, then they would have to add the fence at that time. But we can't go into a development and require them to add a fence if it's illegal non-conforming.
I just noticed, I lived over there, so I noticed a lot of big neighborhoods, major growth right there, and that was never, so I just didn't know if that was ever addressed.
Yes, and I can look into those specific ones, specific examples. Feel free to send us an email, and I can make sure if it wasn't installed that we look and try to figure out why.
Madam
It's a
Mayor.
retention, that would be a retention pond.
Yes, it's a retention pond. If it stays wet, detention ponds dry out.
Betsy, and then I will come to you, Katie.
I know what one you're talking about, and it was before, and it's privately owned. That development does not own it, and in fact, the owner supplied it with fish back in the day, and I think there's still fish in there for the kids to go fishing. So, but it is privately owned.
Yeah, Katie.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a question regarding Title 8, Bullet Point 2, for fences allowed to be up to 12 feet tall and approved by the city administrator. We did have a situation a few years ago where a fence was permitted that blocked a historic view of Sager Creek coming down Mount Olive between where Creekside Tap Room is and that next property. And so we no longer are able to see the creek there, and that's one of our scenic city is a very important thing to tourism. And at the time, my concern is we need to think about what we're blocking when we put up fences like this as far as views, and I don't know if there's a way to include something like that. But when we're looking at our historic part of the city, we shouldn't have a fence. And you know what I'm talking about. It's right there off Mount Olive. And I don't think that building is used for anything that needs that to be private now. But once that happens, you've lost that view forever. So I don't know, I don't have a recommendation of how to word that, but somehow in our historic district, we need to be so cautious about that, seeing what we've been left with. Please.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, it's that section I worked on just today, I think, or yesterday. And we have conditions, so it's not just 12 feet whenever you feel like you want 12 feet. It has to meet certain conditions. So one of them is if there's substantial elevation difference between the two properties. And there's also a density difference. So you're talking about single family to multifamily. We were also looking at land use compatibility. So the eggplant, I know that's on everyone's mind, that could be something that could be considered, because there's approved multifamily just to the east of the proposed eggplant. So that could be, but the point I'm trying to say is that your situation in the historic district, none of those criteria will be met, particularly in that instance. So I think it's safe to say that those protected sites will stay protected. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I don't
Brad.
want to beat up detention and retention, but I was on the board in Ken's position before, and we went down this road. One thing to consider when we went with the ones with the fencing, the berm walls were, you'll see they're a lot deeper. So when water gets in there, a child entrapment was a concern. And then some of the areas that we're looking at now, it's a little wider, and the berm walls are not a threat. They're very low in profile. And so that was our two distinguishing features of those detention retention ponds, just for clarification or thought. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Anyone else?
I have one more
Wayne?
thing. On Title 8, could you clarify the adding a waiver option for some development requirements? Just kind of clarify that a little bit, an example, the UPD zone, what that would look like.
Madam Mayor, Ben Rhodes. So what we're looking at is there were several comments from the development community about the UPD zone and the different requirements, such as requiring mixed use, and 50% of the garages have to be rear facing, and there are several different requirements that have to be met. It's not an option. You to be UPD, you have to have those things. So it felt a little bit too heavy-handed, and we wanted to have just an option so that if the developer felt like they were meeting the spirit of maybe the requirement but not the technical side of it, they could maybe apply for a waiver, but they would need to have some specific reasoning for it. It can't be, well, I just don't want to do it. It has to be something specific to their project that would be inhibitive of correct development or meeting those conditions, rather. So, as it is right now, or as it was previously proposed, the only option for them would have gone to go through the whole variance procedure, which is separate legal notices, separate meeting, and it's just a lot more red tape added onto it, where this would provide a little bit more fluidity so that the approving body of the preliminary plat, whether that's the Planning Commission or the Board of Directors, would have the option to grant some of those waivers if they so choose to do so, and if we had received an application for it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Anyone else? If not, thank you all very much for that discussion. And at this time, we'll move into our discussion for Act 595, beginning with our presentation from Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. So I know everyone knows Act 595 by heart. So, Act 595 of 2025 was just passed in this legislation. In this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about this act, and we're going to define what our current process is in regard to this act, which you'll learn about in just shortly. Changes that are allowed, staff proposal, if the board wants to move forward with these changes, and if and when would the commission and board find it appropriate due to the timing of this law. For example, would you want this to be added with the current UDC discussion at a future date separately, or just put it on the table? But the reason why I'm bringing this forward tonight is this is a new law, and as part of my duties is to ensure that the board and the planning commission are provided with all the information available so you can make the decisions. And instead of having to do this presentation twice, I have you both here at the same time, so why not? So to start with, Act 595 of 2025 is titled as an act to amend the law concerning municipal planning to require an administrative procedure for changes to the zoning or district designation of property in certain instances and for other purposes. It's a little misleading because it uses the word require. However, the legislative text indicates that the ordinance may establish an administrative procedure for changing the zone or district designation of a property when the request is either made by the property either A, made by the property owner, and B, consistent with the adopted land use plan. So what are we talking about? We're talking about zoning. So the state has changed the state statute to allow us as a city board of directors to authorize in some instances at administrative staff level to approve some rezones without having to bring an ordinance forward to the city's board of directors or planning commission. An administrative change of a zone or district designation in the law is not subject to the requirements under the state laws for other rezoning. Decisions rendered on administrative changes of a zone or district designation under this law may be appealed to the planning commission of the municipality. So if staff were to deny a rezone because it doesn't meet the requirements of that, then the appeal process would start with the planning commission. So let's talk about what we're currently doing. So whenever we have a rezone, what is our current process? It's the same across the board. So what do we do now? The citizen typically proposes a rezone with staff. So we start by getting that phone call, that we take an application, staff does a review. Public notices are sent out in advance of the planning commission meeting. The planning commission hears the item and then they forward that rezone request to the board with a recommendation. At that point, it changes into an ordinance. That ordinance is heard by the board up to 3 times. They either approve or deny the rezoning. Oops. So with this law, citizens that meet certain criteria can request an administrative approval of a rezone. Public notices are not required with this process. And if the rezoning request aligns with the future land use map designation, staff may be given the authority by ordinance to approve administratively without requiring an ordinance revision. So we would just utilize the singular text of the code that states that staff has the authorization to make the changes, and staff could could just determine that there's a change to this to the zoning map of the city in these cases. What staff looks at is kind of a compromise. If the board wanted to consider this, the board of directors has the ability to put some other safeguards in place. So staff proposes that if we move forward with this, rezones that meet criteria, this type of criteria for the proposals, and are under 5 acres in size, that staff would give a conditional approval. This would allow staff to draft a resolution that would be sent to the board at least 14 days after a public notice has been demonstrated. While the state gives the authority to the board to not have a public notice for this type of approval, staff still recommends a public notice and a resolution that would allow public notice to go forward. However, it would not require 4 separate readings, 4 separate meetings on certain types of approvals. If staff gave that conditional approval, a resolution would be sent to the board at least that 14 days after a public notice has been demonstrated. And then the board would use that resolution as a method to confirm that additional approval, or could forward that to the Planning Commission for a full noticed ordinance revision. So essentially denying the resolution and saying, no, the board requests the ordinance process instead. So that would allow for those safeguards to still remain in place while still expediting certain review processes. So there can be other limitations on these approvals at the will of the board. For example, staff had recommended 5-acre limitation that can be changed by the board and written into the ordinance as the board wishes. Zoning that would, they could choose zoning that would result in significant land use changes, would cause significant changes to the property. For example, you may say staff couldn't change from A1 to I1 because that would be too intense of a change from staff's approval process. You could potentially say that limiting to requests for specific zoning, for example, only allowing requests in specific commercial zoning and specific residential for like infill zoning considerations. Upzoning and downzoning by one class. The board can make a determination to say staff can only make an approval if it meets the future land use map designation and the other state law requirements. And their request is either one class up or one class down from what their current zoning is. Or the board could state that only lower density down zoning is approved, where you go, for example, from R4 to R2. They could also determine if there's an appeal process. So for example, the board could say, yes, we can go this route, but within X number of days, the board of directors or a certain number of board members can appeal the determination of staff and bring it back to the normal process. And administrative rezoning of GI would be permitted when surrounding land uses support. So that could be applied to other zoning. So really, ultimately, this sets the groundwork. This law sets the groundwork to allow the board to make these type of decisions. But the point that I'm trying to make with these examples is you can set additional limitations because the state has said at this level you can approve it at this staff level. The board can do additional restrictions on staff beyond that. We can have a faster process for rezoning, and we can move forward with Act 595. But ultimately, it's up to the board on at what level and what type of restrictions would you like to see with staff. And staff today is just seeking guidance to determine if the commission and board would like to incorporate changes regarding this law into the current UDC revision, or as a separate ordinance after UDC adoption, or pass on making any changes regarding the law at this time, and we can visit at a later date after we're done with the UDC completely. Staff is available for any questions.
Thank you, Chris. So do I have a direction from, Betsy?
I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
So you mentioned if it's under 5 acres, if it's over 5 acres?
You could set those limitations. 5 acres it's just chosen because that's usually relative to grading permits and associated with that. Usually getting larger than 5 acres starts tying into state DEQ requirements with additional approvals for stormwater pollution prevention plans, et cetera.
Okay, so one of the options would be if it fits the 2040 comprehensive plan into one of the categories, then staff could approve that.
That is correct. I believe the state statute on this, on the state law for this, the minimum requirement, I believe, was that it has to meet the future land use map designation for the proposal. So if they're proposing something that doesn't meet the approved future land use map, then staff by state law cannot approve it.
Okay, because the big thing, the eggplant, it does meet it for the future land use map. Light industrial.
It does not.
In that red part? Light industrial is
It's-
one of those acceptable things.
I believe that a portion of that that's being rezoned is in the mixed-use designation, so it would not fall under that.
The whole
category.
property is mixed use. They're requesting to amend the future land use map for light industrial.
Well, when I looked online at it, it was the dark red, I don't remember what that's called.
So regional commercial is the dark red, and that's on the Walmart property. It's actually, most of the properties to the south are all regional commercial. As you start going up North Progress Avenue on the west side of North Progress, it's all local commercial. And then on that east side is where we see that mixed use. That mixed use came in when they did the Cove PD. They amended that to be a mixed use area.
Okay, so it's just Walmart in that south that's light industrial is acceptable
Yeah.
without
To the
changing
east,
it.
you do have the maroon color, and that's for the reserves, which is multifamily.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Brad?
well, there's been a lot of change of that property, so I think we all can agree upon that, and I hope it continues to change. And speaking of change, my thoughts are, we need to finish Unified Development Code, because that's enough change in Siloam right now. In fact, it's blowing some of our, some people's minds, right? So, and then bring this up and readdress this separately, because I believe you're just, if we throw this in now, you know, there's a real potential of not getting the UDC done. I think you're opening up a whole nother can of worms with this right here. And there's been a lot of activity at the state level. And there's a lot of activity in Northwest Arkansas that does not represent anywhere in the nation. I just did the road trip for you. So spent quite a bit of time on the road, and we are in a unique position, and it does require change. But even though I am I am too progressive for some folks, I even believe that we might want to hold off. A lot of changes are happening, not only in Siloam, but at the state level, and I think would be wise to process this. Just the first step of allow or giving the Planning Commission preliminary. I mean, that's going to be a big. Some board members are going to struggle with that because we're letting go, and I think we start throwing too much stuff at us. And maybe 26 would be great, but I think 25, it feels like to me we have a full plate. Just my observations. Thank you.
Oh, Reed, you wanted to?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I like where this is going. It's going to require us to keep our land use map up to date, which I think is a good thing. But I am in agreement with Director Burns in that it would be good to do this subsequent, so we do have a clearer paper trail.
Betsy?
Madam Mayor, and I agree with both of those directors. And I need time to process it too. It's a lot and too many options at one time to make a decision anytime soon, but I agree, finish the UDC and then let's take a look at this.
Anyone on the commission?
I would agree with that.
You all comfortable with that? Yes,
I would agree with that, too. I think it would be helpful, just as we consider what we would look at in the future, if perhaps a look back to see, what are we talking about here if we enact, if we adopt the exclusions of, let's just say, 5 acres, how much historically would that have moved the other route? And you all may have already done that. But.
Chris? Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone else on the commission have a comment? No? Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, I think staff concurs with all that's been said. This actually goes into effect, I believe, on August the 5th, 4th or 5th. That is why we brought it forward tonight. I wanted to provide this as an information as available option to the board. And yes, staff does agree that since it's we did feel obligated to provide this to the board as information as an option for the UDC since we're revising the UDC as a whole. But yeah, staff does concur with those discussion topics.
And it's just for clarification, if I understand you right, and they may have questions, but what you're saying, this is what the law says, this is making the change, but the city actually has the ability to make that change or change the way it's done anytime. In other words, it doesn't have to go into effect on August 5th, 6th, whenever.
That is correct. Two notes on that, Madam Mayor. And the first one is that it's a may statement. And in the state statute, when it's a may statement, it gives complete authority to the board. So it says it doesn't, even though it says in that title that it's required, the legislative text of the state statute says that they may enact an ordinance. And when they said may enact an ordinance, it's not, even though it says it in the title that it's a required action, that's not the law. The law says that they may do that. So the second note is that it sets the standard pretty low. So you can, starting at the bottom, you can build on to that because it's already been established in state law. So the state law has given you the toolbox, and you can now put your own spin on it, as long as you keep those base standards, which is it has to match the future land use map and the other one that was a part of the presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. So, anyone else have any comments or questions?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Just real quick before we let this one go, because I just need to process it. So, as an example would be Progress, Tahlequah, Simon Sager, a lot of rezoning is occurring out there. And for me, as I watch that, as I'm just watching Siloam, as I'm watching the changes that are taking place, that's what really makes me think on this one here, it'd be, we're on the right track, I think. I don't want to kick it down the road, but I think we're on the right track as these things are changing, so that when we do, because we are going to address that, I just want to make sure we're doing it in the right direction. So that's my thoughts on it. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? If not, Chris, do you have any final comments?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to, this meeting was intended to be somewhat of a formal handoff from the staff side of this project to move it forward to the Planning Commission and the board. I just wanted to give my staff credit for a fantastic job that they've done on this project. And they've put in literally thousands of hours on this project, and they've worked very hard, and I'm very proud of my staff for doing that.
As well, you should be. They have done an excellent job. Thank you all very much for that. I'm sure everyone sitting here at this table thinks and knows that you have gone above and beyond and have put something together that will help our community move forward in the future. So, Wayne, did you have something?
Madam Mayor, I want to say, I did not eat lunch, and you guys fed many of us, and I want to say thank you for that. Lunch or dinner?
Absolutely. So with that, I will ask, do I have a motion to adjourn? Do I have a second? Second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are adjourned.